Before we begin, take one slow breath with me. In.
Now let your shoulders soften if today has been heavy, if your mind has been replaying conversations or imagining endings that haven't happened yet. I hope this room feels gentle tonight because this story is for anyone who has ever looked at someone they loved and quietly wondered, did they stop choosing me? There are some questions that become louder the longer they remain unanswered. Questions that don't shout. They whisper late at night, on long drives home, while brushing your teeth, while lying beside someone who suddenly feels 1,000 miles away. Questions like, did I do something wrong? Why don't they smile at me anymore? Are they already halfway gone? Tonight's story begins with one of those questions. There was once someone who believed love disappeared all at once, like a door slamming shut, like a goodbye spoken out loud, but that wasn't what happened. Instead, love seemed to become quieter, day by day, so quietly that they couldn't tell whether it was disappearing or whether fear was simply becoming louder than affection. The first thing they noticed was the silence, not an angry silence, not the silence that follows an argument. This was softer, almost invisible, the kind that slips into ordinary evenings. Dinner became quieter, conversations became shorter, questions received smaller answers, the laughter that used to fill the kitchen began visiting less often. At first, none of it seemed important. Life becomes busy, people get tired, work follows them home, responsibilities pile higher than either person expected. That happens. Healthy relationships survive seasons like that. So they told themselves not to worry, not yet. But the human heart has an unfortunate habit. When it doesn't have answers, it begins writing stories. Stories rarely based on facts, stories built from fear. And fear is a very convincing author. They began noticing tiny things. A smile that didn't quite reach tired eyes. Dinner left unfinished. Mengs answered hours later. Plans quietly postponed. The little traditions they once protected, slowly disappearing without discussion. None of these things proved anything. Individually, they meant almost nothing. Together, they created a feeling that was difficult to ignore. Maybe you've experienced that feeling too. Not betrayal, not certainty, just distance, the kind you can't explain to anyone else because nothing obvious has happened. Yet somehow, everything feels different if you have. I want you to hear this. You are not weak for noticing change. Our hearts recognize small shifts long before our minds understand them. One rainy Thursday evening, they arrived home carrying groceries. The house was unusually quiet. A single lamp glowed in the living room. Their partner sat beside the window, looking outside, watching rain slide slowly across the glass, not reading, not scrolling through a phone, simply staring, as though the rain understood something no one else did. Long day. The question was gentle, a familiar question one asked hundreds of times before. A small smile appeared. I'm just tired. Nothing unusual about that answer, except it arrived too quickly, almost rehearsed. That night, sleep refused to come, not because of arguments. There hadn't been any. Not because of anger. There wasn't any. It was the uncertainty. The strange feeling of lying beside someone whose breathing you recognize, whose heartbeat you've fallen asleep beside for years, and still feeling completely unable to reach them. Around 2 in the morning, they quietly opened their eyes. The room was dark. Soft rain tapped against the window. Beside them, their partner wasn't asleep. They were facing away, shoulders trembling almost imperceptibly, silent tears carefully hidden, as though crying itself had become something that needed protecting. They almost asked, almost reached out, almost whispered, "What's hurting you?" But something stopped them. Fear, because sometimes we avoid questions when we're afraid of the answers. The next morning, everything looked normal again. Breakfast, coffee, work, goodbye kiss. Routine returned as though nothing had happened, yet the image remained. Those quiet tears, those shaking shoulders, that loneliness, only a few inches away. Weeks became months. The distance didn't grow dramatically. It simply settled into everyday life, like furniture, always there eventually unnoticed, until one day, they caught themselves wondering something that broke their own heart. Maybe they regret marrying me. The thought appeared suddenly, but once it arrived, it refused to leave. Every small disappointment became evidence. Every quiet evening confirmed the fear. Every cancelled plan strengthened it. The mind began building a case against itself. Maybe you've done that too, collected tiny moments, arranged them carefully, until they formed a story that hurt you even though nobody had ever spoken the words aloud. Our minds are extraordinary detectives. Unfortunately, they often investigate the wrong mysteries. From then on, they started apologizing more often for little things, things that didn't require apologies. I'm sorry dinner's late. I'm sorry work ran long. I'm sorry I'm tired. I'm sorry. As though enough apologies might somehow repair something they couldn't even identify. Their partner always smiled gently, always said, "It's okay," but somehow those words never eased the fear. Because reassurance offered without explanation and can only travel so far. Then something changed. One Saturday morning, they suggested taking a weekend trip, nothing expensive, just somewhere quiet, somewhere together. The answer came softly, "Maybe another time, another time." Such harmless words, yet somehow they echoed through the rest of the day, because another time slowly became not this week, then not this month, until eventually it became another dream quietly placed back on the shelf. My friend, if you're listening tonight and you've convinced yourself that someone's silence automatically means they stopped loving you, I hope you'll wait a little longer before believing that story, because sometimes the people we love are carrying burdens they don't yet know how to name, and sometimes our own fears fill empty spaces with answers that were never true. That night, they stood alone in the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of tea, one slowly growing cold, listening to rain outside, wondering how 2 people could stand inside the same home and somehow feel worlds apart without realizing that on the other side of the same wall, someone else was asking the very same question. That same night, while one stood in the kitchen holding 2 cups of tea, the other sat in the bedroom holding something much heavier, not anger, not regret, something quieter, something far more difficult to explain. Fear, not the loud kind of fear, not panic, not urgency. This was the kind of fear that settles quietly into your chest and stays there day after day, without ever announcing itself. The kind that makes you quiet, the kind that makes you withdraw, not because you want to leave, but because you don't know how to explain what you're carrying. If you've ever held something inside you, something too complicated, too painful, or too uncertain to put into words, then you already understand what was happening to her. It started months earlier, on a day that didn't feel important at the time. A phone call, a conversation, a moment that quietly changed everything, but instead of sharing it, she chose silence, not out of dishonesty, out of protection, she told herself. Just for now, just until I understand it better, just until I know what to say. But days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and silence became easier than explanation, because sometimes when we love someone deeply, we make a dangerous mistake. We try to protect them from the very truth they deserve to know. My friend, if you've ever kept something inside, thinking it would spare someone you love from worry, I hope you hear this gently. Love doesn't need protection from truth. It needs trust. But she didn't know that yet. Instead, she watched him closely, saw the way he smiled, even when tired, saw the way he tried to keep things normal, saw the quiet effort, the small kindnesses, the consistency, and it broke her heart because she believed telling him would take that peace away. So she said nothing, and every day the distance grew, not because love was fading, but because truth was missing. Meanwhile, on the other side of that silence, he was building a completely different story, a story where he wasn't enough, a story where she was slowly realizing she had made a mistake, a story where love was quietly ending, without words. Neither of them was lying, neither of them was betraying the other, yet somehow both of them were hurting deeply, because silence, when left too long, begins to sound like rejection. Days passed, then weeks, then more quiet evenings, more unfinished conversations, more "I'm just tired," more "maybe another time," until eventually it stopped feeling temporary and started feeling permanent. He began preparing himself. Not consciously, not in a dramatic way, but quietly, emotionally, the way people do when they sense something ending but don't know how to stop it. He stopped asking as many questions, stopped suggesting plans, stopped pushing for conversations that seemed to go nowhere, because asking and receiving nothing back hurts more than silence itself. And she noticed, of course she noticed. She saw the change, felt it, understood it, but by then, she didn't know how to fix it, because explaining everything now would mean admitting she had been hiding it for months, and that felt like another kind of betrayal. So silence continued on both sides, until one evening, everything shifted. It was raining again, a softer rain this time, steady, gentle, almost comforting. He had left work later than usual, long day, heavy thoughts. The kind of day where silence follows you home. He stopped by the hospital, not intentionally, not with purpose, just habit. Someone he cared about was there, someone she had been visiting often, someone she spoke about only briefly, and never in detail. He didn't plan to stay long, just a quick visit, a quiet check-in, then home. But as he walked down the hallway, he heard something, a voice, soft, familiar, her voice. He slowed, not out of suspicion, just instinct. The door wasn't fully closed, a small gap, light spilling into the hallway. He wasn't trying to listen, not at first, but then he heard something that made him stop. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Her voice barely above a whisper, fragile, nothing like the calm tone she used at home. I watch him every day, a pause, a shaky breath. I watch him thinking he's the problem. Silence, the kind that fills a room before tears. I see the way he looks at me now. He thinks I stopped loving him. Another pause, longer this time, and I don't know how to fix that without breaking him even more. He couldn't move, couldn't think, and couldn't even fully breathe, because in that moment, everything he believed began to fall apart. I thought if I stayed quiet, I thought if I handled this alone, I could protect him. A soft sound, maybe a hand brushing against fabric, maybe someone shifting in a chair, but I think my silence is hurting him more than the truth ever would. Another pause, long, heavy, real. I'm so tired of pretending everything's okay. Her voice cracked just slightly, but enough to reveal everything she had been holding back, and then the sentence that changed everything. I'm afraid he's already starting to let go. The hallway felt different now, like the air itself had shifted, because for months he believed she was pulling away, and now he was hearing something completely different. She wasn't leaving, she was breaking, alone, and suddenly, every moment replayed itself differently. The quiet dinners, the distant look in her eyes, the soft, I'm tired, the tears she thought he didn't notice. None of it meant what he thought it meant, not once, my friend. Sometimes the pain we carry isn't caused by what someone did, it's caused by what we misunderstood, and sometimes two people can stand inches apart, both believing the same lie, that they are losing each other, when in reality, they are both just trying to survive something silently. He stepped back, quietly, carefully, as though making noise would break something fragile. He didn't go in, didn't interrupt, didn't confront her, because in that moment, he realized something. This wasn't a betrayal. This was a weight she had been carrying alone for far too long. And for the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about her, sitting in his room, speaking softly, holding something she didn't know how to share. And suddenly, his own pain felt different. Not gone, but understood, because the story he had been telling himself was never real. And now, he had a choice: to confront, to question, to demand answers, or to finally listen. My friend, before we continue, I want you to take one slow breath in and out, good, because this part of the story isn't about discovering the truth. It's about what happens after the truth is finally seen, and sometimes that can be the hardest part of all. He drove home in complete silence, not because he was angry, not because he felt betrayed, but because every memory from the past year had begun rearranging itself. The nights she quietly stared out the window weren't nights she regretted him. They were nights she was carrying something alone. The tears she tried to hide had never been about disappointment. They had been about exhaustion, and every time she'd whispered, "I'm okay," she had really been saying, "I'm trying." He had spent months believing he wasn't enough, while she had spent those same months trying desperately to keep him from hurting. Neither of them had been the enemy. The silence had been. Maybe you've experienced something like that. Maybe you've replayed conversations looking for proof that someone stopped loving you when really they were simply overwhelmed by something they didn't know how to share. Sometimes the person sitting beside us is fighting a battle we accidentally mistake for rejection. That evening, she came home later than usual. She looked tired, not the kind of tired sleep can fix, the kind that settles behind someone's eyes. She placed her keys on the table, removed her shoes, and quietly apologized for being late, just like she always did. He looked at her for a long moment, then he walked into the kitchen, made 2 cups of tea, the same tea that had gone cold so many nights before. This time, he carried both mugs into the living room. He sat beside her, not across from her, beside her. For several moments, neither of them spoke. And strangely, for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel frightening. It felt patient, as though it were finally making room for honesty. Then he said something simple. "I went to the hospital today." Her fingers tightened around the mug, only slightly, but enough for him to know she understood. "I heard you talking." Her eyes slowly closed, not because she'd been caught, but because she was tired, so incredibly tired, of carrying everything alone. For a few seconds she didn't speak. A single tear slipped quietly down her cheek, then another. She wasn't trying to hide them anymore. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry." He gently shook his head. "No." Another pause. "You don't have to apologize." She looked at him, confused. "I spent months believing you regretted us." His voice trembled. "I thought you stopped loving me. I thought I was losing you." She covered her mouth with one hand. Tears came faster now, not loud tears. The kind that arrive when someone finally says the thing you've been afraid to hear. "I never stopped loving you." Her voice broke. "Not for one single day." She lowered her eyes. "I just didn't know how to tell you everything." The room felt impossibly still. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, 2 hearts that had spent months speaking different languages were finally beginning to understand each other again. Very slowly, she told him everything. About the diagnosis, about the appointments, about the sleepless nights, about watching someone she loved become weaker, about promising to keep it private, about believing if she carried enough herself, he wouldn't have to. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered, "but somewhere along the way, I stopped letting you be my partner." Those words stayed with him, because she was right. She hadn't stopped loving him. She had simply stopped letting him carry life beside her. "My friend, sometimes we confuse protecting someone with shutting them out, but love was never meant to be a locked room. It was meant to be shared, even when the news is frightening, especially then." He reached for her hand, not to interrupt, not to fix anything, just to remind her she wasn't alone anymore. "I wish you had told me," he said softly. I know," she answered. "I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" She looked down into her untouched tea, then smiled sadly. "Afraid you'd look at me differently. Afraid I'd become another problem you had to solve. Afraid I'd be too much." He squeezed her hand gently, then smiled through tears. "You were never too much. You were carrying too much, and those are very different things. If nobody has ever told you that, I'd like you to hear it tonight. Being overwhelmed does not make you difficult to love. Needing help does not make you a burden. Crying does not make you weak, and asking someone to stand beside you isn't asking too much. It's what love is for." They stayed awake talking until sunrise, not arguing, not blaming, just talking, really talking. For the first time in months, maybe even years, they spoke about fears they'd hidden, dreams they'd quietly abandoned, the pressure both of them had carried, trying to appear stronger than they really felt. Something beautiful happened that night. Nothing in their circumstances changed. The illness was still real, the uncertainty remained. Tomorrow would still bring difficult decisions, but somehow everything felt lighter. Because pain shared has a way of becoming smaller, not disappearing, just becoming possible to carry. Together, over the following weeks, they made one promise, not a promise to never struggle again. That wouldn't be realistic. Life always brings new storms. Instead, they promised something simpler. Instead, no more suffering. If something hurt, they would say it. If something frightened them, they would speak it aloud. If one of them began carrying too much, the other would help. Little by little, the house began changing, not physically, emotionally. Laughter returned, not every day, but often enough. Meals lasted longer, conversations became deeper. Sometimes they still cried, but now they cried together. Months later, one evening, they sat on the porch, watching another gentle rain. She leaned against his shoulder. He wrapped a blanket around both of them. Neither felt the need to fill the silence. Because this silence was different. This silence wasn't hiding anything. It wasn't made of fear. It wasn't built from assumptions. It was simply peace. He smiled quietly. You know, I almost believed we'd forgotten how to find each other. She looked at him. We never lost each other, she whispered. We only got lost inside our own fears. There is something I hope you'll remember after tonight's story. Not every quiet person is planning to leave. Not every distant heart has stopped loving. Sometimes, someone is simply carrying more than they know how to say, and sometimes the stories we create inside our minds hurt us far more than the truth ever would. If someone you love has become quiet, don't immediately assume the worst. Ask one more gentle question. Sit beside them, make the tea wait. Listen. Sometimes, the conversation that saves a relationship begins with nothing more complicated than, I'm here. You don't have to carry this alone. And if you're the one carrying everything, please hear this. You don't have to protect everyone from your pain. The people who truly love you would rather carry your sadness with you than watch you disappear behind it. Maybe that's what closure really is. Not finding perfect answers. Not fixing every wound, but realizing love was never asking you to be unbreakable. Only honest. So tonight, before you close your eyes, I hope you'll let go of one thing, the story you've been telling yourself, without evidence. The fear, the assumption, the quiet belief that you aren't enough. Because sometimes the silence between two people doesn't mean love is ending. Sometimes it simply means both hearts are waiting for someone to speak first. Take one last slow breath with me. In and out good, and out good. You made it through today, and whatever you're carrying tonight, I hope you'll remember. You don't have to carry it by yourself anymore. Thank you for spending these quiet moments with me. Ret Nowly, Sepleave gently, and if your heart is still waiting for a conversation, I hope one day it finds the courage to begin it. Good night, my friend. I'll leave the light on until you fall asleep.